Biology is the scientific study of life. Pretty much the word biology can be broken up into pretty much bio, life, and ology, study of, typically translates from Greek. And I'm gonna give you a brief just overview. This is chapter 1 of the textbook, and we're gonna, build up to just a broad overview of biology just to start out. Uh, Nothing too overwhelming. So there is technically no formal or strict definition of life, as highlighted here in this figure from the textbook. This is figure 1.2. Life is largely a property or characteristic that we see. And outlined here are some of the properties of life in terms of how we determine whether something is alive or not. Where, as highlighted here at the top left, one of the characteristics is order, as in this close-up of a sunflower demonstrates the highly ordered, oh, one moment, the highly ordered structure that characterizes life. You have energy processing, okay, and they give an example here of a butterfly, but virtually every organism on the planet that is alive, including ourselves as humans, we process energy. We eat food for a reason. One is to, support growth and development. The other is, we need it to meet our energy demands. Another property of life is evolutionary adaptation. Okay, and that might not be familiar yet, but we're going in this uh, in this part of the book, chapter 1, we will give you a brief overview of evolution, because at the end of the day, all of the life that we observe in the world and all its diversity is driven by evolution. You have a response to the environment. Essentially, this can also be reworded as a response to, stimulus slash environment, in terms of, you get some sort of input, or, just as you respond to pain in a certain way. Virtually all life, or what we deem as alive, responds to the environment or responds to some sort of stimulus from the environment. You have growth and development, and they give you a nice example here of a plant, where, again, just as plants grow and develop, we as humans and every organism on the planet that's alive goes through some sort of life cycle. What that includes growth and development. And then you have also regulation, where what do we mean by regulation? Typically, it usually means, some sort of balance, okay? Also often termed as equilibrium, where returning to some sort of baseline. And the example that they're giving here, okay, is the regulation of blood flow through the blood vessels. In this jackrabbit's ears, so in that jackrabbit, the ears have a large surface area, and the ears have a lot of blood supply running through them. And that's part of the temperature regulation of that particular jackrabbit or that particular organism, where the large blood supply allows it to essentially exchange heat with the environment, or more specifically with the surrounding air that it says in the description. So somewhat similar to you or we as humans, we need to regulate our temperature, or even just, a small change in our temperature, as in like a small fever. We tend to feel really bad, even just a small fever, just a small change in temperature. And we tend to regulate our body temperature, in a very close range. And then you have reproduction here, okay? As in, organisms, living things reproduce their own kind, as in, giraffes reproduce and give birth to other giraffes, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the overall general characteristics that are the properties of life. Again, it's not a strict definition. It's more, this is what we look for to establish that something is alive. So, 1 second. There's a question: what other types of regulation are there? That's a very good question. I'm glad you asked that. So another type of regulation is, let's say, your oxygen levels, okay, are regulated, where if you breathe in too much, okay, there's a term called hyperventilating, okay, where you can actually breathe in too much oxygen. Okay, that's not, and that is tightly regulated in terms of if you hyperventilate, okay, generally you'll feel pretty faint, or your body will respond in a certain way, such that, you'll start regulating your breathing, or it'll kind of like sort of force you to regulate your breathing. And another type of regulation that's also critically important is the pH of your blood, okay? Where pH is the measure of acidity, how acidic or basic something is, and your blood has a specific pH, usually in the range of like 7.2 or 7.4. And it needs to be very tightly regulated, as in even a very small change, okay, as in going from like 7.4 to like 7.6 or 7.7, that's a very huge change. And another type of regulation that's relevant to humans and many other mammals is blood sugar. Okay, when you consume a food that has a high amount of sugar, okay, the levels of sugar in your blood is typically tightly regulated, assuming you're a typical healthy human. So yeah, that's a great question. Those are some classic examples of regulation. Moving on to the next slide. So overall here, again, this is the figure from the first page of the book, is there are unifying themes in biology, where it's sort of bringing back this aspect of organization, or going back to the previous slide, order, okay? They're using here in this mouse, okay, you have organization, as in they're zooming in there, where you see some of the tissue of, of the mice or the mouse there, and you see that the cells are ordered in a specific way. Okay, they're not just randomly distributed. There's a specific order of how the cells are organized, and you're even going to see a little bit of, even if you look inside the cell is also highly ordered. It is not random. And then yes, you have this evolution aspect, or natural selection. You have genetic information encoded in DNA determines a mouse's fur colors, okay, where virtually all organisms that we consider alive, it has some sort of genetic information, sort of what we say the blueprint or the instructions to make the organism. Where the example that they're giving here, the mouse, its fur coat is brown, but at the end of the day, sort of the information to make that brown fur, it comes from the genetic information at the DNA level that we're going to expand upon a little bit. And then, yes, you have this aspect of energy flow, where energy flows one way from the sun to plants, to a mouse, matter, uh, and then cycles between mouse and its environment, where at the end of the day, okay, all the energy that the organisms on Earth uh, use is coming from the sun, okay, and we have this symbiotic, or cyclical relationship with plants that we're going to see in a little bit, where plants, through their metabolism, okay, uh, they produce they produce oxygen, rather, to be more specific, okay, as part of the metabolism. And we as humans, we use oxygen as part of our metabolism, and we exhale, as in we inhale oxygen, we exhale carbon dioxide, and the plants use the carbon dioxide that we exhale. So we are highly dependent on each other. And then, yes, there's this aspect of interactions, where you see here a hawk, hunting for its food, consuming a mouse, or what will consume a mouse. And then, okay, we have this whole planet, and we try to organize it to understand life on our planet. And this is different levels of organization, or what you can sort of view as zooming in or zooming out. Where zooming out the most is the biosphere, okay, pretty much the entire planet. And that's all life on Earth. So again, going back to that three letters of biology, bio. So the biosphere, all life on Earth, just as biology is the study of life. And then we're zooming in, we're just slowly, gradually zooming in, going from the biosphere to ecosystem. And that's an ecosystem, that's all living things in a particular area. And then we're zooming in even more, going to community, where the array of organisms inhabiting a particular ecosystem is called a biological community. And then again, we're just zooming in more and more. And then within a community, we zoom into population. A population consists of all the individuals of a species living within the bounds of a specified area that interbreed with each other. And then zooming in even more, you have organisms. Individual living things are called organisms. So, each individual human being on the planet, that is an organism. Uh, where each plant in the meadow is an organism, as the example used there. And then zooming in more, going with the plant example. Okay, plants, you can zoom in and they have organs, just as, zooming in on an individual human, if you zoom in more, we have organs, heart, liver, pancreas, etc., skin. So yeah, the structural hierarchy of life continues to unfold as we explore the architecture of a complex organism. And so they're using this leaf as an example. This lupine leaf, consisting of 6 leaflets, is an example of an organ. And then, okay, within organs, we're just further zooming in, we have tissues, where viewing the tissues of a leaf requires a microscope. Each tissue is a group of cells that work together. So essentially, in a nutshell, a tissue is one single type of cell that they work together to perform a specialized function. Where in your own body, okay, you have liver cells that make up your liver. You have skin cells that make up your skin. And you have, pancreatic cells that make up your pancreas. And so, where each cell is essentially, or the part where each cell is uniform and the cells are coordinating to carry out a specific function, that would be a tissue of the example that they're giving there. And then again, if we're zooming in even more, we have cells. Okay, and as they say here, the cell is life's fundamental unit of structure and function. Now we're going to expand upon that a little bit more, where cell is essentially the smallest unit of life. Where pretty much generally speaking, there are some exceptions. In the sciences and biology, nothing is ever really black and white, but generally we consider the cell the smallest unit of life, as in you can't get smaller than that and still be alive or have the properties of life and all of the properties of life that we went through. But we can still continue zooming in, where zooming in inside the cell, okay, we have organelles. So just as we as humans, we have organs inside our body, inside the cell, they have organelles. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper on those later, or in a later lecture. But then zooming in further on organelles, we have molecules, okay, where molecules are composed of atoms, where a molecule is a chemical structure consisting of 2 or more units called atoms, represented as balls in this computer graphic of a chlorophyll molecule. So pretty much zooming in the most, we get to molecule. We can technically, zoom in further. We can go down to the individual atom or element from the periodic table. But generally in biology, like we stop here, as in biology, the smallest that we typically deal with is at the molecule level. Now we deal with molecules, but again, molecules are not alive. Organelles are not alive. The cell up to this level, that's where you have that fundamental unit of life. And then sort of the broad overview of just diving in deeper into the cell a little bit and its relevance to, life and making an organism. But as you can see here in the figure 1.6 from the textbook, Inherited DNA directs the development of an organism. Again, so here you have sperm and egg combining. Okay, that gives the full genetic material. And again, as mentioned earlier in the course, it's the full genome or the genetic material that determines or that gives the instructions to make the organism. That's overall what's being shown here from like one single fertilized egg, and then it develops into the full offspring, where you have the traits inherited from both parents, mother and father. But all the information, okay, to make this offspring is contained in the genetic material or the genetic information. And highlighted here in figure 1.7, that's that genetic material that I'm referring to. That's in the nucleus of the cell. So going back to the previous slide, the organelles, okay, that's inside the cell. One of the organelles is the nucleus of the cell. And so that's what they're pointing out here, okay? The nucleus of the cell, that's that genetic information, the DNA. In figure 1.7 in the A part here, that's that DNA double helix that most people have seen, but that is what it looks like roughly at the atomic level. And as they say, it's a double helix, as in you technically have two strands of DNA in the helix. And what they're showing on the right is the single strand of DNA. So to create the full double strand, you pretty much are sort of roughly, but not exactly. You have a second copy. The full names, great question, A, C, T, and G. The A is adenine, the C is cytosine, the T is thymine, and G is guanine. Those are what we call the nucleotide bases. Good question. But that's I'm probably not going to ask you to memorize what the A, C, and T and G stand for, but it's good that you asked. A adenine, C cytosine, T thymine, and G guanine. So diving in just a little bit deeper in terms of the cell, okay, just a few slides. Again, the cell is the fundamental unit of life, and it's a small membrane enclosed units composed of aqueous solution. Aqueous is just fancy word for water, okay? Where in the cell, it's an aqueous environment. That pretty much is just another way of saying it's a water-like environment. There's a lot of water inside the cell, just as there's a lot of water inside us as human beings. And all living cells have evolved from a single cell, okay? And that's what they're sort of showing here. You have all different types of cells, from neurons, in your brain and also throughout your body. You have B cells and dendritic cells. Those are part of your immune system. You have red blood cells, okay? So all the different types of variety of cells, different shapes, but they all originate from a single cell. And all living cells have evolved from a single cell. And you have unity and diversity of cells. Again, that was hinted at the previous slide, okay, where cells vary enormously in appearance and function. So it can be as pretty much as function as red blood cells carrying oxygen to a muscle cell, contributing to you, allowing you to lift heavy things. And they're showing here that they can be organized in various different ways, have different functions, and different sizes and shapes. But at the end of the day, you can sort of boil it down to living cells are self-replicating collections of catalysts. And yes, there is a unity and diversity of cells. Cells are the building blocks of life. Cell division and growth are responsible for the unique characteristics of organisms. So again, you're starting off with one single cell, okay, and then it divides two cells, and then once you divide even more, you get lots of cells that are the same, but they're coordinating to carry out a function. That's where you get a tissue, and then you build up to there to organs, and then you have the multicellular organism, pretty much, like us as humans, we're a multicellular organism. This is going back to sort of the zooming in and zooming out. So going from the cell to the multicellular organism, we're effectively zooming out. And then again, you have unity and diversity of cells, and they vary enormously in appearance and function, and again, a variety of shapes and sizes. And this is just showing you some nice pictures of different types of cells and how they can vary in size. Should there be an organ system? So, Jasmine, that's a great question. Let's say for the purposes of the theory, yes, absolutely. Where, yeah, going back to pretty much uh, this slide, there is organ system for most organisms, and you can pretty much consider that there's organ system there, but we sometimes leave it out because it's not quite as clear cut. But yeah, great question, and you can pretty much consider it as there. And so on the right-hand side, it's from the textbook. They're essentially showing you the flow of information in an organism. Okay. And on the left-hand side, it's roughly the same thing, just depicted in a different way. Where you have replication. Okay. That's replication of the DNA. And then you go from DNA to RNA. That process is called transcription. And then from RNA to protein, okay? If um if life is like a movie, okay, as in like a movie that you watch in the theaters or like a TV show, uh the script, okay, the script of the movie or the script of the TV show, that's like the DNA. That's the instructions, so to speak, or like the lines that the actors are going to read. And then the proteins are like the actors on the screen, as in they essentially do the actual work as part of the living systems, as in cells express uh, lots and lots of proteins, thousands of proteins. Whereas you, as a human being, you express about 20,000 different types of proteins. And so those are sort of like the actors on screen. They actually carry out all of the functions that are important, the metabolic functions. And the flow of information is, yeah, again, DNA to RNA is the process is called transcription. And DNA is double-stranded. RNA or mRNA, to be more specific, that is single-stranded. That's why, here at the top in bluish green, you have double-stranded, then you go to single-stranded, and then the process of going to mRNA to protein, that process is called translation. And it's pretty much the same thing here, just shown a little bit differently. But it's overall DNA to RNA to protein. And you have the two functions, DNA to RNA transcription, RNA to protein translation. And as they're showing here, proteins, they have a very unique shapes and sizes. So this is pretty much going over the same thing, where in all living cells, genetic information flows from DNA to RNA to protein. And generally, it is in that direction, the direction of the arrows, generally speaking. There are some exceptions because there's always exceptions when it comes to science and biology. But that's pretty much why we show it that way, as in you go from starting with DNA to RNA and then RNA to protein through these processes shown on the right. And we call that this flow is known as the central dogma of biology. And just to sort of wrap up sort of a little bit deeper dive on the cell, or at least the flow of information inside a cell. Again, we're going to go over the properties again a little bit quickly. But yeah, living cells are self-replicating collections of catalysts. And what does this mean? A catalyst is essentially it's something that speeds up a chemical reaction or makes a chemical reaction go faster. Sort of like pushing the accelerator on the car, make the car go faster. And yeah, just to sort of quickly review, again, there's no There's no real strict definition of life. Life is largely a property. Okay. And here are the basic properties outlined, in order. Where, yeah, life is the most basic property of cells. They're highly complex and organized. Again, you have this order aspect of life. And then uh, you have cells possess a genetic program and the means to use it. And yeah, as mentioned, genes encode the information for cellular reproduction, activity, function, and structure. And then you have cells have the ability to reproduce themselves. Okay, a cell can divide to produce two daughter cells containing a complete set of genetic information. So again, going back to that fact that at the end of the day, uh, we all descend from one single cell. Not just we as humans, in terms of me. Before I was born, I descended from one single cell that developed. And then even going back through the history of life, okay, when life first started on the planet, okay, billions of years ago, that all started from, one single cell. And then it reproduced, and then it went from there. But yeah, a cell can divide to produce two daughter cells containing a complete set of genetic information. Cells acquire and utilize energy. Okay, again, going back to the food analogy or the food example, where we as humans, we need food and water to eat because food provides us with energy to carry out our daily functions and provides us with the ability to, grow and develop, create new tissue, new muscle, repair tissue, as in if you get a cut, your body will heal. And so we need the building blocks coming from food to carry out those processes. And cells acquire and utilize energy. Oh no, I already read that. Sorry. But yeah, cells carry out a series of chemical reactions. And this is known as metabolism. Okay. In terms of pretty much the whole series of reactions that we carry out to grow and survive. But metabolism is very often broken up into kind of two separate categories where you have catabolism and you have anabolism, okay, where uh, catabolism, that's essentially the breakdown of something, okay, as in you can think of catabolism, it's within metabolism, but it's more specifically the process of either, let's say, breaking down food, as in when we eat food and digest it, that would be an example of catabolism, where we're consuming something and we're breaking it down into smaller parts, smaller building blocks, so that we can use it. So that let's say we can use it to, repair a wound. That would be an example of anabolism. So you have kind of two branches of metabolism that are kind of the mirror images of each other, where catabolism is breaking down things, and anabolism that is making things, or what we call synthesizing new things. And they're giving you some examples of the types of reactions, the chemical reactions that occur that are part of your metabolism. This glycolysis, that's the specific process of breaking down sugar. Okay, there's sugar in your food, but more specifically, there are many types of sugar. Glucose is an example of a sugar, and this process called glycolysis that is specifically devoted to the breakdown of glucose type sugar. And then you have the Krebs cycle and the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle takes place in plants, and the Krebs cycle, that's uh, part of the process in your metabolism. That's a critical part in producing the energy in the form of ATP. Okay, this is largely our energy currency, or what we use most often as a form of energy. And as they say here, cells can convert glucose to ATP, where that's why you have this process called glycolysis, where we don't use the glucose or the sugar directly as energy. We convert it to something else, and more specifically, we convert it to ATP, and it's the ATP that we use as energy. And ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. But you don't need to really know that detail, at least not for this lesson. And then, yeah, pretty much wrapping up the basic properties of cells. Cells engage in mechanical activities, and as mentioned, respond to stimuli in terms of, again, using the example of, if someone, pokes me with a needle, that's painful. And so I will respond to that pain. Plants respond to sunlight, et cetera, or many plants will kind of tend to grow towards sunlight because they need the sunlight in order to carry out their metabolic functions to, pretty much continue to grow and live. And again, cells can self-regulate. Okay, you don't need to know all these. This is more detail here than you need to know. I'm just trying to get the message across that cells can self-regulate. And again, going back to that example of, temperature regulation, you try to maintain your body temperature at 37 degrees Celsius, okay? And even if your temperature increases just like 1 or 2 degrees Celsius, a slight fever, you tend to feel that pretty significantly. And yeah, cells evolve, and we'll sort of cover that a little bit more, or we'll touch upon evolution here. Um, but as they say, cells have evolved from a common prokaryotic ancestor. We're going to cover what exactly that means in a bit. But yeah, we pretty much all come from, one single cell, as mentioned earlier. So this is figure 1.9 from the textbook, essentially showing this energy flow aspect of life, where there is a one-way flow of energy in an ecosystem during photosynthesis. This is a critical metabolic process in plants, okay, where they largely use the energy from light to make sugar or to make carbohydrates. But yeah, during photosynthesis, plants convert energy from sunlight to chemical energy stored in food molecules such as sugars, like, for example, that glucose that I mentioned earlier, which is used by plants and other organisms to do work and is eventually lost from the ecosystem as heat. In contrast, chemicals cycle between organisms and the physical environment. So yeah, there's this aspect of uh, energy lost as heat, where uh, heat is a form of energy, okay, but heat is not a useful form of energy, where generally speaking, or pretty much as of now, universally speaking, organisms or don't know how to use or harness heat as a source of energy. And we just kind of like radiate it off. But as they say here, in terms of the energy flow, okay, light energy comes from the sun. Plants take up chemicals from the soil and air. This is one of the reasons why we need to water plants in order for them to grow and survive, because plants, just as we need water, plants need water. They use it as part of their metabolic functions. It's critical for their survival. And plants convert sunlight to chemical energy, as in they harness the energy of the sun to create carbohydrates and slash sugars. And yes, organisms use chemical energy to do work. So again, going back to the symbiotic or close relationship that we have with plants, where the example that I gave of like plants, they use carbon dioxide, okay, as part of their metabolism to make sugar, okay, and then through that process they produce oxygen. They sort of exhale oxygen, but plants, don't breathe in the way that we do, but they output oxygen, and then we breathe in oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide. The same thing holds true in terms of the symbiotic relationship in terms of energy, where, as highlighted here, light energy comes from the sun. Plants convert sunlight to chemical energy, okay, and we consume that chemical energy, as in we eat plants, and many other organisms eat plants. Why do plants need water? Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the reasons why they need water is, as mentioned, uh, let's say here, plants convert energy from sunlight to chemical energy, as in stored in food molecules such as sugars. In order to make the sugars, okay, they need the water. To be more specific, okay, a fancier term for sugar is carbohydrates. Okay, and carbohydrates, you can break down that word of carbon, as in the carbo of carbohydrates, carbon, the atom or element from the periodic table, and then hydrate, that's the water aspect, as in the word carbohydrate is basically carbon with a water molecule. And so, in order to make those sugar molecules, those carbohydrates, they not only need carbon, the CO2 from the air. That's why plants need carbon dioxide. Okay. And they get the carbon dioxide from, or at least part of the carbon dioxide, from the carbon dioxide that we as humans exhale. And then they take the carbon from the carbon dioxide and they need the water to make the carbohydrate. That is the ultimate answer, where to make their carbohydrates. Uh, yeah, that's a great question. So we ultimately get our carbon from plants, as in again, that's why there's this whole sort of symbiotic relationship. The plants take the carbon dioxide, they're able to make sugar from it, carbohydrates, and then we eat plants, or other organisms eat plants, and then we eat those animals, or we eat the plants themselves. And then through the process of us breaking down carbohydrates, we exhale CO2 or carbon dioxide. So that's another, yeah, great question. This is really, that's why they're showing here this chemical cycling aspect, where it really is like a cycle. Plants provide us with energy, and then we provide a critical ingredient for plants to make their energy. But one of the key differences is that plants are able to harness sunlight. We as humans definitely cannot harness sunlight. And then, yeah, this decomposers, such as fungi and bacteria, break down leaf litter and dead organisms, returning chemicals to the soil. So, yeah, great questions. And then, yeah, figure 1.10 from the book, you have feedback regulation. The human body regulates the use and storage of glucose. So that's that. So glucose, again, is a sugar. And that's why I brought up this aspect of blood sugar when the good question was asked about regulation, other types of regulation. And this is one of those examples where you have glucose in the blood, but if you have too much glucose in the blood, that is a negative or bad thing, where it can cause some damage. And so the body has a way of regulating that, where, as they say, the human body regulates the use and storage of glucose, a major cellular fuel. This figure shows negative feedback. The response to insulin reduces the initial stimulus. And yet you have high blood glucose levels, stimulates cells in the pancreas to secrete insulin into the blood. And then basically ultimately what happens is, as a result of high sugar in the blood, uh, your body produces insulin, okay? And then insulin allows cells in your body to take up sugar from the blood. This is what we call negative feedback, trying to essentially restore balance. The blood sugar may be getting too high, and then through the release of insulin, it tries to bring, or, generally speaking, does bring the blood sugar down. And then, yeah, figure 1.11, interactions of an African acacia tree with other organisms and the physical environment. So pretty much uh, going back to that flow aspect overall, where, yeah, you have this sunlight. So instead of just like, a small plant in the ground, it's a tree, and you're seeing this relationship between, the tree, the plant, and the actual organism. And this is what I was referring to earlier, of like plants, or in this case, the tree is sort of exhaling or producing O2 and sending it out. And then it's taking in carbon dioxide. And we we as humans and other mammals, like this elephant here, it exhales carbon dioxide, and the plant, the tree in this case, can take it up. And then, as they say, animals eat leaves and fruit from the tree, returning nutrients and minerals to the soil in their waste products. As in, essentially, when the elephant goes to the bathroom, it's excreting things into the soil. And so it's pretty much trying to track the flow. You have this really symbiotic or close relationship where plants sort of rely on us, we rely on plants, and there's this whole cycle. So you have uh, do plants take other carbon? So yeah, that is fantastic. No, all the questions have been fantastic. This is another fantastic question. So the answer is yes. Okay. But for our purposes, at least for now, CO2 is, let's say, the critical one. Uh, but absolutely, they take other carbon compounds. Yes. Yeah. Super great question. So shown here in figure 1.13 from the textbook are the three domains of life. What do we mean by domains? It's highlighted here, domain bacteria in the top left. On the right-hand side, domain archaea, okay? And then you have domain eukarya, okay? And they go through, so this is sort of a classification system where within domains, you have kingdoms. So you have kingdom Animalia. This is where we as humans would fall into this category. But we as humans, we fall into the domain of eukarya, as in we are what we call, as biologists, eukaryotic organisms. Our cells are eukaryotic cells, and I'll expand on what that is in a little bit. But within the domain, we have kingdoms, and kingdom Animalia is where we'd fall into that category. And yeah, you have domain archaea and domain, either domain bacteria or also referred to as prokaryotes. That I'll clarify in the next slide. So yeah, these are the types of cells, okay, as in there are two major ones, okay, eukaryotes. So those are animals like us, we humans are animals. And you have plants and fungi, as in our cells are eukaryotic cells. And then you have prokaryotes, and that's all bacteria and archaea. So shown here in the different colors. So shown here in blue, that's the bacteria, okay? And then shown here in yellow, that's archaea, okay? But the archaea is within the prokaryotes. And then you have eukaryotes, again, sort of branching off. Uh, but if you look at the center, okay, really the take-home message from this is looking at the center, okay? This is trying to show the relationship, as in we all originate from one single cell, then sort of like in the center, where the pointer is. That would be like that one single cell, okay? The first cell on Earth, and then it branched from there. You get all these different branching points going in different directions, where you go to bacteria, archaea, and then eukaryotes. And eukaryotes, that's where you find your animals and fungi. And again, we humans are animals. And then figure 1.14, an example of unity underlying the diversity of life. So as mentioned in the previous slide, we all originate from one single cell. So if we originate from one single cell, billions of years ago, then we probably have a relationship, or there's some sort of unifying thing throughout all life, as in, we might have things in common with bacteria, if we look closely enough. But really, this is trying to show you sort of the unity of life, since we all come from a single cell. Where cilia, are extensions of cells that function in locomotion. So certain cells, okay, certain single-celled organisms have cilia as movement. It's sort of their version of feet, but not quite the same as like we have feet. But this is essentially some single-celled organisms' way of getting around through the process of cilia. But they are extensions of cells that function in locomotion. They occur in eukaryotes as diverse as paramecium, found in pond water, and humans. Even organisms so different share a common architecture for their cilia, which have an elaborate system of tubules that is striking in cross-sectional views. So, you know, we'll find these cilia that are used for locomotion in certain single-celled organisms. So the cilia of a paramecium, okay, that's a single-celled organism that allows them to go through pond water. But even we as humans, in some of our cells, we have cilia. Uh, and that's what they're showing here on the right-hand side of like the cilia of windpipe cells. So, and that allows for movement of things, as in the cells that line the human windpipe are equipped with cilia that help keep the lungs clean by sweeping a film of debris trapping mucus upward. So, uh, in the paramecium, it's used for locomotion. But we have cilia, but it's used in a different way. So, as mentioned multiple times, since we originate from a single cell, okay, and we therefore have something in common, or there's unity of life. What what results in this unity and diversity, uh, where you have many species of organisms, this huge diversity of life, and so that co- uh, that is driven by evolution. Okay. And evolution, the father or the founder of evolution, or who discovered the process of evolution, is shown here in figure 1.16. That's Charles Darwin, where the portrait shows Darwin in about 1840, well before the 1859 publication of this revolutionary book, commonly referred to as The Origin of Species. So Charles Darwin wrote this book called The Origin of Species, and this put forth the theory of evolution, where showing how we all originated from one single cell. And you have this huge diversity of life, but we all have a relationship with every organism on the planet. So yeah, unity and diversity among birds. So this is an example of evolution at play, where these four birds are variations on a common body plan. For example, each has feathers, a beak, and wings. However, these common features are highly specialized for the birds' diverse lifestyles. So, there's commonalities in terms of all the birds have wings, but as you can see from the figure, okay, there's a variety, or there's this specialization where they all have wings, but how the wings function are different in each species of bird. Where, yeah, they all, or rather, the hawk can fly and it has wings. The penguin has wings, but it cannot fly. It largely uses its wings for, swimming or getting around in the water. So it's still wings, but as a result of evolution and the environmental pressures, the wings sort of evolved in a different way for each species of bird. And the same thing holds true with the beaks of birds. So, what is this overall process of evolution, or let's say natural selection, to let's say be a little bit more specific? This is the overall process of natural selection, and this is figure 1.18 from the book. So they're showing here population with varied inherited traits. So their example is an imaginary beetle population has colonized a locale, so a specific location, where the soil has been blackened by a recent brush fire. Initially, the population varies extensively in the inherited coloration of the individuals, from very light gray to charcoal. For hungry birds that prey on the beetles, it is easiest to spot the beetles that are lightest in color. So what happens is in the beginning, okay, stage one, or part one of the figure, you have this variety of, let's say, different colors of beetles, okay? But their environment is essentially a dark environment as a result of a fire. And so as a result of the birds, okay, the birds are able to see, they're able to visualize the light colored beetles more easily than the dark ones, because again, they're in sort of a dark environment. The birds essentially start eating the light ones, okay, as in elimination of individuals with certain traits that make them more visible. And then reproduction of survivors. So since the dark beetles, the ones that are able to blend in or have camouflage with the background, they're the ones that survive. And so if those are the ones that survive and they have that dark coloration, then the dark coloration, that particular trait, will be passed on to their offspring. And so this is sort of the overall process, sped up, doesn't occur as fast as this, of evolution or natural selection, where as a result of an environmental pressure, okay, certain traits get selected for. And in this case, as a result of the selective pressure from the bird, the trait of a dark colored beetle gets selected for over time. And then, yes, shown here is another example of evolutionary adaptation. This is figure 1.19 from the textbook, where bats, the only mammals capable of active flight, have wings with webbing between extended fingers. Darwin proposed that such adaptations are refined over time by natural selection. So bats have wings. Bats have wings similar to birds have wings, but actually we have we share sort of an evolutionary history, or let's say there's a relatedness with us and bats, where if you look closely on this area here, okay, on the bat wing, uh, that's actually similar to our hand, at least if you look at the bone structure. If you're able to get a close look at the bone structure, you can see that there's essentially, five, fingers there, but they're not actually fingers. And this is an example of sort of like, uh, as a result of natural selection, okay, sort of the hand or the bones of the hand were sort of like repurposed or shaped over time as a result of natural selection to result in a bat wing. Where this is an example, as they say, of evolutionary adaptation. And then figure 1.20, also from the textbook, is also showing sort of this aspect of evolution, or more specifically, descent with modification, adaptive radiation of finches in the Galapagos Islands. So this was sort of one of the first things that Darwin, okay, Charles Darwin, who discovered evolution, they were observing finches, okay, this particular species of birds. And they saw that, oh, they're all finches, but they all have different shaped beaks. Okay. And that's what they're sort of highlighting here. Of like at each branch point, that's where lineages diverge from a common ancestor. Okay. And that's why you have this different, all these various different types of beaks within the finches. Where if you go back, if you trace it back evolutionary history, you're able to trace it back to an ancestral finch. And then through selective pressure, through some sort of, environmental pressure, it started to branch off and then branch off even further to get the full diversity of the finch beaks. So that's sort of a broad overview of, biology and life and evolution and, the cell as the fundamental unit of life. And then here, biology is a science, okay? And again, it's the science specifically of the study of life. And this is a simplified view. This is figure 1.22 from the textbook, where this is a simplified view of the scientific process, where the idealized process, sometimes called the scientific method, is shown in this flow chart, which illustrates hypothesis testing for a desk lamp that doesn't work. And ultimately, in a nutshell, the scientific process is trial and error. We think something, okay, we have a hypothesis. To be more specific, a hypothesis is essentially an educated guess of like we think this is happening. But then from the educated guess, we try to actually go out and test of like, is that actually true? And they're giving this example here of like, if your lamp isn't working, okay, what are some of the reasons why a lamp is not working? Could it be that the bulb is burnt out? It's at the end of its life, or the bulb is improperly screwed in. And so as a result of the different hypotheses, okay, hypothesis one and two, it's different predictions. Okay. And then we test those predictions. Okay. And you have the two examples of testing predictions: replace bulb, reinstall it, and then the results, as in from testing the predictions, what is the result? And then whether the hypothesis is supported or whether the hypothesis is not supported, trying to get to the truth of what is the actual reality. You started off with two different hypotheses of what could have gone wrong with the lamp, and then you go and test it out. And then once you get to the results of your testing, okay, you go back and see, does it fit with my hypothesis? And you see here that on the left, with the bulb is burnt out hypothesis, once we see that we replace the bulb, okay, the hypothesis works because the lamp works. And then hypothesis number two, the hypothesis is not supported. And then sort of wrapping up, this is, it's shown here sort of in a linear format, a flowchart of the scientific process. But really, at the end of the day, this is the more realistic, okay, model of like there's a dynamic interplay between, hypothesis and testing and results and conclusion, and there's this dynamic process, okay, where there's uh, this collaborative effort in the scientific process, and that's what they're observing here. Whereas they say the process of science is not linear, but instead involves backtracking, repetitions, and feedback between different parts of the process. And yeah, this is just a model of sort of the feedback or the more complicated version of the scientific process, where there's this back and forth process and it's a collaborative process. And so that essentially wraps up lecture number one for this time. And so, as sort of a quick homework, okay, for the textbook, it's just questions 1 to 7 on page 26 of the textbook for next time. Next time, I'll go over the answers to those questions 1 to 7. And that's it for this evening. I hope you enjoyed just the brief introduction to biology, the study of life, where, again, the cell is the fundamental unit of life. And, we can zoom out and zoom in, as in zoom out to the biosphere, every organism on the planet, and zoom in all the way to molecules, and, evolution, and how evolution pretty much explains, or rather largely explains the origin of life and the relationship that we have throughout all the organisms on the planet, and then, how the scientific method works.